This is Closereads,
a philosophy podcast with Mark and Wes.
I'm Wes Alwan.
And I'm Mark Linsenmeyer. Let us talk about Maurice Merleau Ponty's fat book, The Phenomenology of Perception. It was originally published in 1945. I am suggesting that we are jumping right to part one, past the initial 70-some pages of the introduction, talking about phenomenological method. Not that that wouldn't be interesting, but not 70 pages worth. Part one is called The Body, and that is what Merleau Ponty is famous for. Did you, I know we didn't actually read this book together in our initial Merleau Ponty episode. There was a racism and policing episode that you were not on, that we read just section 3 of part 1, which we're starting at section 1 of part 1, or actually before section 1, the intro to part 1. Had you ever read any of this book before at all?
Well, in grad school, I guess. I mean,
yeah,
I
guess
have it in
we
my
did.
mind as having read this maybe in Kelly Oliver's class. You were in that class, right?
Yeah, some portion of it. I couldn't tell you what portion.
Yeah.
I thought I had chosen the sort of intro summary text that we read on PEL together, because that's what we read in something. Maybe that was in my undergrad rather than my grad, but I definitely had this book on my shelf.
Yeah. So I don't remember. It might as well be new.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of these insights are gonna have been in Heidegger, that, Heidegger was all about we're being in the world. You couldn't possibly be skeptical about whether the external world exists. You can't even think about yourself without thinking about the world, contra Descartes. And I guess we want to see what additionally this extended focus on the body, if we actually were to get through it, it's over 100 pages. I'm sure we're just going to try out a few sections here. I'm not sure if this is exactly the best place to start. I recall that this book moves extremely slowly in terms of ideas per page, but let's give it a shot.
All right.
So this is page 77, PDF page 102, Experience and Objective Thought, The Problem of the Body, the intro to part 1, The Body.
Okay. Our perception ends in objects, and the object once constituted appears as the reason for all the experiences of it which we have had or could have had. For example, I see the next door house from a certain angle, but it could be seen differently from the right bank of the Seine, or from the inside, or again from an airplane. The house itself is none of these appearances. It is, as Leibniz said, the geometrized projection of these these perspectives, and of all possible perspectives. That is, the perspectiveless position from which all can be derived. The house seen from nowhere. Take that, Rorty. But what do these words mean? Is not to see always to see from somewhere? To say that the house itself is seen from nowhere is surely to say that it is invisible. Yet when I say that I see the house with my own eyes, I am saying something that cannot be challenged. I do not mean that my retina and crystalline lens, my eye, which is something only French people have. I've never heard of that anatomy. My eyes as material organs go into action and cause me to see it. With only myself to consult, I can know nothing about this. I'm trying to express in this way a certain manner of approaching the object, the gaze in short, which is as indubitable as my own thought, as directly known by me. We must try to understand how vision can be brought into being from somewhere without being enclosed in its perspective. All right, I like that. Good start. Good start out the gate.
Husserl had put this just by saying that, and I think Husserl is sort of the more immediate influence on Merleau
Hmm.
Ponty. I'm not sure how much Heidegger he read, whether he's sort of a parallel thread to Heidegger. It would be very surprising if he didn't read quite a bit. But yeah, so Husserl describes objects, physical objects in the world, like the house, as transcendental. That is, any particular aspect of it, we know that there are more aspects of it to see. There are indefinitely many. There are infinitely many, probably. And so the house as a whole, is it the bundle of all those possible aspects? It's something that, I mean, I guess we haven't really said exactly what it is. Is it a theoretical entity, as Quine says? Are we positing it, that there is something over and above all the actual and possible appearances of it? But certainly, since this is all about describing our perception, we really think of ourselves as seeing the object and not as our eyes as seeing the object. We don't know anything about the physiology of the eyes until we, get out of I want to say the natural standpoint, get out of the default perceptual standpoint and do some science. So when we're just a phenomenology, right, this is the position, the primacy of perception was how it was put in the other book that we read by Merleau Ponty. That we're in the Cartesian contemplating the contents of my consciousness position by default. And so what is just describing, what is the essence of the house, the object? Well, it is whatever it is that binds all those different possible perceptions together. It strikes us as something that is directly causing our perceptions of it, and that is the object.
Yeah. So I like the idea that this perspectiveless position is derived as if it's something mathematical. You take all the data points and then you find uh, the equation of the curve that runs through all of them, and that's your abstract object in a sense. But I think the philosopher, let's see, Thomas Reid, who will be reading soon on PEL, says something like each one of these appearances is really a signifier in a sense. We don't see the appearance that our perspectival limited appearance on the object, right? The front of the box, while all the other angles are missing. We don't see that particular appearance as such, as just a trapezoid or whatever it looks like if you take it literally, right? We do perspectival stuff, right? We don't even see the trapezoidal shape from an angle as trapezoidal. We see it as rectangular. Um, and right, so the raw perception is a signifier for what lies beyond it, the imagined three-dimensional object, which we can only understand as three-dimensional through a temporal sequence of going around it, handling it in our, in our hands, and so on and so forth. Did we capture all of? So that's the basic part, and of course, it's as you said, it's not new to Merleau Ponty. This is taken from Husserl, and it's arguably there in as early as someone like Reid, who was responding to Hume.
Well, and Leibniz, right? I
Maybe
guess
it's
is
there
before
to
Reid, probably.
Leibniz and maybe Hume himself wouldn't be surprising, but um, maybe all the early empiricists, I guess, since they're doing simple ideas and the sequences of ideas, they've probably cashed this out in one way or another. Um, so the gaze, a certain manner of approaching the object, the gaze.
Right. This is going to be, I think, a big technical term.
Yeah, so that's why I'm pausing there. Um,
How we must understand how vision can be brought into being from somewhere without being enclosed in its perspective. So I'm not sure how much being is not capitalized here or anything.
that's a great line, by the way. Yeah. So how do we get this view from nowhere that we have derived from our particular perspectival positions that we're always in? He's trying to express a manner of approaching the object, the gaze, which is directly known to me. So this is like supposed to be a Cartesian moment, right?
I think so. Right. So it can't be, I don't think, talking about a signifier, the way you were just like Reed does, is halfway to talking about, actually, it's just propositional, which you mentioned Rorty, and that's Rorty's view, is that there is no special acquaintance relationship, which sounds like what Merleau Ponty is talking about by the gaze. It's that we see that some property is instantiated, is connected with some, basically another property, because we don't see substances directly. So we see, when I see the house, I see that, well, this shape is really just, okay, that piece of wood has a relation to that piece of wood, which has a relation to this other box-like thing behind it, and however I'm describing it, and all we see are just a bunch of relations, which we could then turn into propositions, that there's nothing special about our immediate qualia of them, as far as knowledge goes, at least, because we are always seeing through some theoretical framework. So not that Rorty, I don't want to cannibalize a Rorty episode from next Sunday, but not that Rorty believes that there are equally good alternate conceptual schemes that you could describe. I could describe this house as in terms of the shapes of the blocks, or I could describe it in a completely different way. No, there actually is, given what kinds of creatures we are, pretty much one way that we're going to get to the notion of a house. And there's nothing controversial about that, but it is not from acquaintance, from perception, and then somehow abstracting out to facts. We just actually perceive in terms of propositions or facts. Is that what you understand Reed is getting at? That we, that this,
I'm not sure. I'm not sure yet.
Okay, so we'll see.
I mean, he is using the word derived, so which suggests something non-immediate, non-immediate, the perspectiveless position. But I think, as you're pointing out, it does sound like he wants to say that something immediate and as immediately knowable and incorrigible as the I, and I think therefore I am, if I'm not mistaken. So in other words, I would be, this intentional object is what I would call it, and I would say it's something abstract, right? Because it's not, it is and it isn't encountered in immediate acquaintance, and I guess is the way to put it. It isn't in the sense that that's not what the raw data of experience is, right? We just get the perspective. But on the other hand, there's an immediacy to our grasp of the whole object. And maybe that's an argument for the Cartesian point of view, if we thought it were constructed like Kant, right? As an appearance. If it's constructed by us as an appearance, as Kant would have it, then that's the best form of immediacy one can get. And it's why Kant was attracted to it. Anyway, I guess we'll figure it out as we go along.
To see, so this is on the second page, page 78. To see an object is either to have it on the fringe of the visual field and be able to concentrate on it, or else respond to this summons by actually concentrating upon it. When I do concentrate my eyes on it, I become anchored in it. But this coming to rest of the gaze is merely a modality of its movement. I continue inside one object, the exploration which earlier hovered over them all, and in one moment I close up the landscape and open the object. The two operations do not fortuitously coincide. It is not the contingent aspects of my bodily makeup, for example, the retinal structure, which force me to see my surroundings vaguely if I want to see the object clearly. Even if I knew nothing of rods and cones, I should realize that it is necessary to put the surroundings in abeyance, the better to see the object, and to lose in background what one gains in focal figure. Because to look at the object is to plunge oneself into it, and because objects form a system in which one cannot show itself without concealing others. More precisely, the inner horizon of an object cannot become an object without the surrounding objects becoming a horizon. And so vision is an act with two facets. For I do not identify the detailed object which I now have with that over which my gaze ran a few minutes ago by expressly comparing these details with the memory of my first general view. That would be something like Hume's. We have a series of snapshots. So it sounds like he's going in a more Gestalt Bergsonian way here. When in a film, the camera is trained on an object and moves nearer to it to give a close-up view, we can remember that we are being shown the ashtray or an actor's hand. We do not actually identify it. This is because the screen has no horizons. In normal vision, on the other hand, I direct my gaze upon a sector of the landscape, which comes to life and is disclosed, while the other objects recede into the periphery and become dormant, while however not ceasing to be there. Now with them, I have at my disposal their horizons, in which there is implied, as a marginal view, the object on which my eyes at present fall. The horizon then is what guarantees the identity of the object throughout the exploration. It is the correlative of the impending power which my gaze retains over the objects which it has just surveyed, and which it already has over the fresh details, which it is about to discover. This just keeps going on.
Yeah, why don't you pause there?
Yeah, let's stop there. I mean, it seems like
a very long paragraph.
We're just describing figure versus background. The idea of the horizon, I remember from Husserl, is, I mean, here it seems like quite literally, right? That the periphery of your vision is just sort of presents itself as something that extends indefinitely in some directions. It's hazy because we're not focusing on it. Husserl had talked about that specifically as, I see a view of the house and it projects that there are other possible views. So part of the horizon of looking at the house is I could walk around to the left of the house and I will see more house.
Yeah. And really, there are an infinite number of possibilities in the horizon. So it's all possible interactions with that object.
Breaking it open, eating
extends
it.
out to infinity. Sorry?
Breaking it open, eating it.
That's right. Yeah. So, and then the further claim is that for Merleau Ponty is that the two are correlative. Our attention to a particular object and the fading of the objects in the horizon or the surrounding periphery. So maybe this is a different use of horizon here. Maybe we ought not to mix that up with Husserl exactly, because he's talking about peripheral vision.
Yeah, it all seems very literal, just like the disclosing and unconcealing and concealing that we just had in Heidegger. We're getting very literally here, that you cannot focus on one thing. You cannot open it up and unconceal it without literally concealing the stuff that's around it. Whereas with Heidegger, we were sort of talking about abstract ideas, not in perception itself.
Yeah. The horizon then is what guarantees the identity of the object throughout the exploration. It's correlative. So why is that? Why does the horizon, in the sense of periphery, guarantee the identity of the object? If it were in Husserl's sense of horizon, I would understand that sentence.
It would have to be the character of this particular horizon, because as I'm looking over an object, it's not that everything that gets pushed to the periphery is equal, right? It counts as part. If I'm looking at a big elephant, then the parts of the elephant that are not in my focus are still part of the elephant and are, perceived as part of its horizon per qua object, one of its appearances, whereas, the background next to the elephant is not.
Okay. So that's an argument for more of the Husserlian sense of horizon here. The two
I think
together,
that's what the intro section made me think more of. Yes.
Yeah. Well, I was just confused by the peripheral vision thing, but I guess the two can work together in this sense. But it's a little bit confusing. Anyway, all right. So, right, we can see it in the phenomenological sense. We can see how the horizon guarantees the identity of the object because it is the sum of all the possible perspectives, and that is the view from nowhere, which really is the object, in a sense, or is the grasping, is the way we grasp the object as such, even when we're stuck in a particular perspective.
But I think that, the fact that we're going to get to the body eventually here, we're already hinting at this, that we're in, as I'm looking over the elephant, what determines that these are going to be elephant appearances and that the air next to it is not going to be an elephant appearance has something to do with the way that our eyes are caught by the physical thing. Like the actual perceptual experience does, because it is a little arbitrary, at least for like a house. What counts as part of the house? Does the porch count as part of the house? Does the yard count as part of the house? Right? If you buy a house, you're buying the yard. So there's a little bit of, well, does it look like it's part of the house? That's at least, if you didn't know what the property laws were in the area, right? As somebody told me, yeah, when you buy a condo, you don't buy the walls, they even put it on the lease, or on the sale, as you're buying the air within these walls, because you can't just break holes in the wall. You don't own that. The condo association owns that. So
Interesting. All right. Shall I go on?
yeah.
No distinct memory and no explicit conjecture could fill this role. They would give only probable synthesis, whereas my perception presents itself as actual.
No distinct memory, or this is just still about seeing them as part of one object. Yeah.
Right. So I think you're right. The Hume might be a target here. Right. So the idea is that it's not that we have memories, that we have all these different perceptual, right? The object is not a bundle of perceptions in the sense that we've necessarily gathered every possible perspective from every possible perception. That is really horizon. And most of those perspectives we haven't experienced. We just have enough.
Yep.
We do have enough in memory, right? But we don't need it. I mean, so seeing a tower on the horizon, we don't see it as two-dimensional. Well, now I'm using horizon very literally, but seeing a tower in the distance,
sure, no, that's fine.
Seeing a tower in the distance, I don't see it as two-dimensional just because I haven't actually walked around the tower yet. There's not a memory can't fulfill the role that he's talking about. And even if I had walked around the tower, you can see how that probably wouldn't be sufficient either, right? For grasping the object as something transcending the particular perspective. I can't just say to myself, oh, well, I've seen all these other different perspectives. And then I have to imagine that the perspectives could continue based on new possible interactions and positions and whatever happens with time. And
it would only give a probable synthesis, whereas my perception presents itself as actual. So if you do see what you think is a tower on the horizon, or we just read about barn facades in another context where I've experienced lots of barns. I don't have to walk around the barn to see that that's a barn. Oh, but it's actually not a barn at all. It is a facade that somebody put up because they really like how the fronts of barns look, and they want to, being cheeky.
You're on a movie set.
Yep.
The object horizon structure, or the perspective, is no obstacle to me when I want to see the object. For just as it is the means whereby objects are distinguished from each other, it is also the means whereby they are disclosed. To see it enter a universe of beings. To see is to enter a universe of beings which display themselves, and they would not do this if they could not be hidden behind each other or behind me. In other words, to look at an object is to inhabit it, and from this habitation to grasp all things in terms of the aspect which they present to it. All right, let's stop there. Why does he want to use this word inhabit? I think it has something to do is with the fact that, in a way, if you take a single perspective, you're an outsider. But if you have them all in some sense, how do you, right? How do you imagine that? It's almost like being identified with the object or being inside it. So to the extent that we transcend the perspectival, I'm not sure that you could find a better word than inhabit.
But it still retains a relation to the at least the imagined perspectival, because imagining you're inside it, it's sort of like I'm getting at the essence of it. I'm doing, whereas Rorty, we're saying an object is just the sum of its relation to other things, which can be put in terms of propositions. And no one proposition is actually more important than any of the other ones. There's no sense for Rorty that this is the essential one. Now you really know the thing. No, you just know more of its relations to other things, and which ones are important is just going to what do you want to do with it? If it's a tool, then you care about how the aspects of it that are tool-like. And if it's to eat, then you care about the nutrition aspects of it and how easy it is to get to your mouth and things like that. But imagine that what strikes us as implausible about that is because it does seem like, I know Husserl has the idea that we somehow can grasp. That's how we understand things, is we somehow grasp what it is, the essence of the thing. And so when I see a barn, even if I'm wrong and it is a barn facade, I immediately am like, I know what barns are, and I'm sort of like, probably there's an inside of the barn, and that's where the action's at, where all the animals will be hanging out or whatever. So we think that we get some kind of essence. I maybe I'm just making that up. He hasn't used that word yet.
Well, just looking back a little bit, no distinct memory and no explicit conjecture could fill this role. So we should keep in mind that we're not getting to the perspectiveless position, to the object per se, by conjecturing, right? By doing the derivation explicitly, by saying, well, if I were on the other side, this is what I would see. We don't think about that stuff unless we need to, right?
Could there
we
be
just
an
see
implicit,
the barn.
an implicit conjecture?
Yeah, I mean, I think
Okay.
that must be implicit.
It has to be a conjecture because you could be wrong, right?
Yes, I mean, but
Yeah,
you don't.
okay.
We're not explicitly saying to ourselves, when I see the tower, to see it, I don't have to say to myself, oh, well, if I were on the other side of it, this is how it would look. I just see the tower. So it's immediate. I would say implicit and procedural cognitive faculties are very much have to be at work here if we were to be more analytic about it. But all right. So
Just because they're getting, he's nibbled on Hume a little bit here. Empiricists are trying to be good phenomenologists too, but phenomenologists say, you empiricists, you just falsify all the data, right? Bergson comes along and, you think that experience is just a series of snapshots and that somehow we construct these, we put these together. But nobody ever said that this construction was explicit, or that what Hume is doing or Kant is doing in saying
for Kant,
we build
made
experience.
It explicit that it is implicit.
Right. Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
It happens
yes.
behind the scenes, and then we come to it like it's something. Oh, look at this.
So at most you could say that, Kant is not justified in saying that this is how behind the scenes that it works, that we have no point of view from which we could derive these things. And phenomenologist is just trying to stick to what we actually can perceive. All these other people are theorizing. They're doing something over and beyond, whereas I'm just going to describe.
Yeah. To see is to enter a universe of beings which display themselves, which does sound like Heidegger. And they do this. They couldn't do this, so they couldn't be hidden behind each other or behind me. So the behind me part, why does he want to use this metaphor of behind now? I mean, it's another way of getting at the limitedness of perspective, obviously, and
that the body is going to be involved. Yeah, that perspective is going to be a quite literal perspective and not just, oh, Nietzsche's perspectivism, that you could have different conceptual schemes, you could have different ideas, you could have different base assumptions. No, you could actually be standing in a different spot.
Right. All right. I'll continue to read through
Yep.
the end of this paragraph. But insofar as I see those things too, they remain abodes open to my gaze. Sorry.
The things are just like the house or whatever you're looking at. Yeah.
Yeah. And being potentially lodged in them, I already perceive them from various angles central to my object. Angles. I already perceive from various angles the central object of my present vision. Thus, every object is the mirror of all others. When I look at the lamp on my table, I attribute to it not only the qualities visible from where I am, but also those which the chimney, the walls, the table can, quote unquote, see. But back of my lamp is nothing but the face. But back of my lamp, the back of my lamp is nothing but the face which it shows to the chimney. Interesting. I can therefore see an object insofar as objects form a system or a world, and insofar as each one treats the others around it as spectators of its hidden aspects, and as guarantee of the permanence of those aspects. It's almost like there's a panopticon of objects here.
Well, and it's sounding like Berkeley, that, well, it's sort of God is looking at out of all the different objects, or there's, right, some panpsychism.
Yeah. So it's helpful to have all these little helpers, all these little perception helpers. If we want to get to,
hey, everybody, where are my keys? Look, I know somebody can see them. Couch cushions, are they under you?
Any seeing of an object by me is instantaneously reiterated among all those objects in the world which are apprehended as coexistent, because each of them is all that the others, quote unquote, see of it. Our previous formula must therefore be modified. The house itself is not the house seen from nowhere, but the house seen from everywhere. The completed object is translucent, being shot through from all sides by an infinite number of present scrutinies, which intersect in its depths, leaving nothing hidden. Wow, very, very rich ways of putting things and metaphors. So we're to imagine this system of objects, and each object as having its own gaze and only, as seeing the others in a metaphorical sense, such that we can imagine all the lines coming from one, from the central object of attention. You can imagine lines connecting it to all the other objects, maybe in the world, but at least in the room, shot through with all those potential perspectives, and therefore translucent, which is a way of saying just what we were saying before, that we don't experience it as opaque in the sense of being limited to one perspective. We just immediately grasp it as the object.
It sort of is sounding like Rorty's pan-relationism, that, all an object is just its relation to all the other objects. Rorty was not talking about that in such a physical, spatial way. But once you say there's nothing hidden in its depths, then we're not talking in a purely spatial way either, right? We got to be getting down to quarks and things like that, where we don't really talk about quarks in terms of spatiality. If something were small enough to see a quark, then it would probably, to it, be infinitely far from the quark or something. It just, the metaphors break down. So it's just relations. What we've here said about the spatial perspective could equally be said about the temporal. Okay, so yeah, the temporal we can't see in the past, but let's see. If I contemplate the house attentively and with no thought in mind, it has something eternal about it. and an atmosphere of torpor seems to be generated by it. It is true that I see it from a certain point in my duration, but it is the same house that I saw yesterday when I was a day younger. It is the same house that either an old man or a child might behold. It is true, moreover, that age and change affect it, but even if it should collapse tomorrow, it will remain forever true that it existed today. Each moment of time calls all the others to witness. It shows by advent, quote, how things were meant to turn out, unquote, and, quote, how it will all finish, unquote. Each present permanently underpins a point in time which calls for recognition from all the others, so that the object is seen at all times, and it is seen from all directions, and by the same means, namely the structure imposed by a horizon. The present still holds on to the immediate past without positing it as an object, and since the immediate past similarly holds its immediate predecessor, past time is wholly collected up and grasped in the present. The same is true of the imminent future, which will also have its horizon of imminence. But with my immediate past, I have also the horizon of futurity which surrounded it, and thus I have my actual present seen as the future of that past. With the infinite future, I have the horizon of the past which will surround it, and therefore my actual present as the past of that future. Thus, through the double horizon of retention and protension, my present may cease to be a factual present, quickly carried away and abolished by the flow of duration, and become a fixed and identifiable point in objective time.
Right. So he's giving us an account of the way, so very similar to the way in which a particular perspective doesn't entirely feel like that. Feels like we have the transcendent object spatially. We also have it temporally. So just because we're at a slice at a moment in time doesn't mean that when we look at the box on the table, but we say, oh, there's box at time t1, as an analytic philosopher might say. We don't say that, right? Oh, look, there's the time t1 box. We just say there's the box. So we give it a lot of temporal padding. We conceive of the object as carrying its past and its future with it in order to even call it an object. And the way we imagine time, so we imagine it as a right, a point in objective time.
Right. So I know, from other things reading Merleau Ponty, and he got this from Bergson, that again, we start in this Cartesian point of view in which time is not chartable on, it's not measurable in strict increments like a clock would. It is, a boring lecture is subjectively, I should say, longer than a sex, probably. Well, although maybe the way your tantric sex makes the moment
not that long to begin
drags
with,
out, but subjectively,
depending on the objectively, it feels like forever. But sorry, subjectively, I mean, I don't know.
Right. Well, that's the thing. Like when you have these subjective feelings, you're like,
it might be 7 minutes in reality.
That was objectively a really long and boring speech. In other words, we can all agree that there's intersubjective agreement that time is not as science says it is. It is. This is one of the things in phenomenology. It's supposed to be, all this stuff is interpersonally verifiable. So this is not just him describing his experience. This is, consciousness describing its own experience. And, some of this, as well as this pan-relationism where everything, the pan-relationism, right? We just read the people talking about against the Buddhists. And this is another thing I associate with, nothing has its own being. Everything only exists insofar as it's related to everything else. And so there's no foundation to anything. And I get, in Hegel, I also, even the words he's choosing, it looks a lot like Hegel, where it's, each thing is constituted by its opposing force. So each object is constituted by the presence of all the other objects around it. right? It would not be, there's no such thing as an independent object.
Yeah, I mean, at least that's one stage in the
Mm-hmm.
phenomenology, the perception. Well, that's the force and the understanding, but I think he moves beyond that. But yeah, anyway.
Well, everything ends up being not necessarily in a closed circle like the Buddhist is maybe picturing it, like yin determines yang and yang determines yin, and if neither exists, then the whole thing collapses. Or if they should have some underlying reality to hook onto, but they don't, and so that's certainly not Hegel's. It's more that the yin and the yang interact, and by one perspective and another perspective meeting, then we're pushed to see the whole thing from an external perspective. In other words, each even pair of perspectives implies a third perspective on those things. And that's sort of the engine of, why it's not just a yin yang circle, but an ever expanding ontological chain, I guess, between one perspective and another, giving rise. I mean, that's at least what the horizon looks like here, right? That you could have my actual perception of this part of the house, and then you're standing over there and you have an actual perception, or I'm imagining what it looks like from your perspective or the perspective of the tree or whatever. And from these finite things, then it's sort of cascading into a potential infinity of relations. All right, I'm getting too abstract. Let's get back. Is it my turn here?
Yeah.
Yeah. But once more, my human gaze never posits more than one facet of the object, even though by means of horizons, it is directed towards all the others. It can never come up against previous appearances or those presented to other people otherwise than through the intermediary of time and language. If I conceive in the image of my own gaze those others which, converging from all directions, explore every corner of the house and define it, I have still only a harmonious and indefinite set of views of the object, but not the object in its plenitude. Plenitude. In the same way, oh, it is, right, plenitude. Yeah. In the same way, although my present draws into itself time past and time to come, it possesses them only in intention. And even if, for example, the consciousness of my past, which I now have, seems to me to cover exactly the past as it was, the past which I claim to recapture is not the real past, but my past as I now see it, perhaps after altering it. Similarly, in the future, I may have a mistaken idea about the present which I now experience. Thus, the synthesis of horizons is no more than a presumptive synthesis. We were saying conjecture, but yeah, a presumptive synthesis operating with certainty and precision only in the immediate vicinity of the object. The remoter surrounding is no longer within my grasp. It is no longer composed of still discernible objects or memories. It is an anonymous horizon now incapable of bringing any precise testimony and leaving the object as incomplete and open as it is indeed in perceptual experience. Through this opening, indeed, the substantiality of the object slips away. If it is to reach perfect density, in other words, if there is to be an absolute object, it will have to consist of an infinite number of different perspectives compressed into a strict coexistence, and to be presented as it were to a host of eyes all engaged in one concerted act of seeing. The house has its water pipes, its floor, perhaps its cracks, which are insidiously spreading in the thickness of its ceilings. We never see them, but it has them, along with the chimneys and windows which we can see. We shall forget our present perception of the house. Every time we are able to compare our memories with the objects to which they refer, we are surprised, even allowing for other sources of error, at the changes which they owe to their own duration. But we still believe that there is a truth about the past. We base our memories on the world's vast memory, capital M, in which the house has its place as it really was on that day, and which guarantees its being at this moment. Taken in itself, and as an object, it demands to be taken thus. The object has nothing cryptic about it. It is completely displayed, and its parts coexist while our gaze runs from one to another. Its present does not cancel its past, nor will its future cancel its present. The positing of the object, therefore, makes us go beyond the limits of our actual experience, which is brought up against and halted by an alien being, with the result that finally experience believes that it extracts all its own teaching from the object. It is this ekstase The footnote.
Standing out.
Yes.
Stands out of. Yep.
Active transcendence of the subject in relation to the world. So this is, yes, ecstasy. It's Heidegger's form is is exactly what's put here. It is this ecstasy, the standing out of experience, which causes all perceptions to be perceptions of something.
Yeah.
So I guess there's a reference. There's, on the one hand, the conjectural, or what is the word he used here? Presumptive synthesis that we give of the thing. But there's always a reference there to truth, to, well, it is aiming at the thing. And we know that the thing actually has, right? If there were a God that, like Berkeley's God, is making the thing exist by perceiving it from all possible angles at the same time. It's like that Berkeleyan notion is somehow built into our perception, that it is the regulative idea at which our presumptive synthesis aims at.
Yeah. We could do it, or we could perform part of the task if we had to. We could go into the house and see the cracks. It doesn't matter for our purposes that we don't know that those particular cracks are there. We know what's possible, right, in general of a house. If someone said that the walls were bleeding, we would understand that that's not an appropriate way of talking about house walls. That's not within the horizon for houses, but cracks are. So we're not surprised to hear there are cracks, but we didn't need to anticipate them explicitly. And so I think it, again, it's worth reiterating that we have this implicit sense of the object. And so it reminds me of Wittgenstein, and this is, kind of Rorty as well, but Wittgenstein's language is use or meaning is use. Sorry. So that a concept in a way works much in the same way. When I understand a word, reading it on the page, and understand the concept involved, I don't, right, if it's the word is dog, I don't have to imagine a particular dog. I might schematically imagine a dog. But I don't need a mental image at all. And if I'm reading, often I'm just going too quickly, right, to call up images. To feel like I've understood the word dog in a sentence, I don't even need the image. I just need the sense that from this particular starting point, this particular signifier, I could form the right sentences with it, to be a very analytic philosopher about it. I could put it in the proper syntactical positions that imply I know what it means, but also I could use it in any of the particularly appropriate ways it could be used. And I would recognize, I would be able to, if I saw a dog, I'd be able to point to it and say dog. And all that in a way is another way of describing a horizon. All these different possibilities of what I could do with the word, or could do with the concept if I had to, but I don't have to do it in that immediate moment to say that I've understood it. And similarly, I don't have to do all of this conjecture or hypothetical stuff in the presence of the object to grasp the object.
So it does look like we're pushing towards this. I was looking up, Rorty says Sellers calls this psychological nominalism, the doctrine that there's nothing to be known about anything save what is stated in sentences describing it. So that Descartes or Russell or somebody like that emphasize the gaze, what we were saying, this direct acquaintance with it, and that we somehow then derive this, all of our knowledge is supposed to boil down to direct perception, right? That's what your empiricists will say, but that sort of discounts the fact that we get most of what we know through testimony. And even dogs, like we've seen a lot of dogs, and the more experience you have of real dogs, the more you know about dogs, but you've heard way more about dogs than you've actually seen dogs. So most of what's going in your use of dogs, why you don't have to conjure up a specific image, partly because we've seen so many different kinds which dog are you going to picture? So it just is not even right. It's not efficient. You just have that concept of dog that, maybe you would say you don't really understand it if you were like Mary the dog scientist who have never actually seen a dog, but has learned everything there is to know about dogs, but maybe is blind and is not allowed to touch things, and whatever would make you not have direct awareness of a dog.
Yeah, I mean, as I was saying this to Seth or I was saying this on another episode, and Seth objected on an episode of the Partially Examined Life. So I think a child, the concept, you grasp the concept of dog, you don't need to grasp it inductively. And some of what allows us to grasp it is, of course, evolutionary. And you might want to just say that about the broad cognitive categories, right? The ability to grasp its spatiality or its temporality or something else very generic. But there's no reason not to think that our ability to grasp an object as animate or having a telos of some kind, having a functional biological organization. My cat can do that, but it didn't learn that. It has to have that as part of its evolutionary heritage, that it can distinguish between me and the couch. So, but the broader point is, I think a child can very quickly, they can see an animal, and even before they have the word for it, know that this is a type of um, thing. And I guess I'm bringing this up just because it also speaks to the concept of the to what's implicit here, um, and to the fact that I don't think induction can ever support the right density, to use his word, right? To reach
Mm-hmm.
perfect density, it can't just be that we've had enough perspectives of the object. There's too many to account for. So we have to have, there is something quite transcendent or an infinite about this capacity. It's not to imagine infinity exactly in an explicit way, but implicitly, yes.
I guess our bringing in concepts like dog is a little off point here, that he's really just talking about identifying a particular dog, which of course, following Hegel's phenomenology, like, well, particulars are always identified as part of what perception to be of something is, not just it's of
Yeah, I was just
that.
making a parallel.
No,
So
yeah.
yeah,
So
you're right. Yeah, he's not talking about concepts,
but there's probably still something concept like about an individual object, right? Because we're saying this appearance is an instance of an infinite number of possible appearances of this thing. And so
yeah,
to identify, Sharky the dog at time one and Sharky the dog at time two is in fact kind of like identifying two different things as dogs.
yep, yep.
And in neither case do we explicitly, is the reasoning explicit, and though maybe it should be, because we could miss see something. I don't know. Is the focus on potential error that I keep bringing up a little off the point here, that we're um well, I guess he brought it up himself in terms of memory, right? That the presumptive synthesis is going to be different than the real object, and that's part of the experience of it. Go
So
on.
the very last,
Oh,
sorry,
no, go. Yeah, if
were
you want
you
to complain
continuing?
about ecstasy.
Yeah, we just might as well say something about that really quickly. So, I mean, one way of thinking about this is, right, the human subject stands out from, or consciousness per se, right, stands out from its surroundings, in the sense that it is the type of thing to which other things can be disclosed, right? It can be receptive of those things, and it is ecstatic in the sense of it's open to intentional objects, to other objects. Um, but I think the way, so Merleau Ponty is helping us understand that openness, that ecstasy.
Yep. Oh, we got less than two pages in
Yeah.
the section. I think we can do it. Go ahead.
Well, we know we only have 5 minutes. All right, go ahead.
Okay, obsessed with being and forgetful of the perspectivism of my experience, I henceforth treat it as an object and deduce it from a relationship between objects. I regard my body, which is my point of view upon the world, as one of the objects of that world. My recent awareness of my gaze as a means of knowledge I now repress and treat my eyes as bits of matter. They then take their place in the same objective space in which I am trying to situate the external object. And I believe that I am producing the perceived perspective by the projection of the objects on my retina. In the same way, I treat my own perceptual history as a result of my relationships with the objective world. My present, which is my point of view in time, becomes one moment of time among all the others.
Point of view on time.
Okay, yeah. Becomes one moment of time among all the others. Yeah, okay. My duration, reflection, or abstract aspect of universal time, as my body is a mode of objective space. In the same way, finally, if the objects which surround the house or which are found in it remained what they are in perceptual experience, that is, acts of seeing conditioned by a certain perspective, the house would not be posited as an autonomous being. Thus, the positing of one single object in the full sense demands the compositive bringing into being of all these experiences into one manifold creation. Therein it exceeds perceptual experience in the synthesis of horizons as the notion of a universe, that is to say, a completed and explicit totality in which relationships are those of reciprocal determination, exceeds that of a world or an open and indefinite multiplicity of relationships which are of reciprocal implication. So I feel like this is addressing Heidegger, right? Where being in the world, being in the world is an open and indefinite multiplicity of relationships, but a universe is a completed and explicit totality. And so we, in order to posit an object, we don't just perceive it as existing in some sort of space that extends indefinitely, in time that extends indefinitely. We actually perceive it as in this finished world, that's in space and time, has the coordinates. I mean, maybe we're jumping here. It seems like we've already jumped here from the Cartesian perspective to, oh, no, now I see just my own body as an object in the world, because now I'm sort of entering the scientific point of view where I'm objectively seeing like how far the house is from my head. And I'm saying I'm not just perceiving it, I'm perceiving my own perception of it. I detach myself from my experience and pass to the idea. Like the object, the idea purports to be the same for everybody, valid in all times and places. And the individuation of an object in an objective point in time and space finally appears the expression of a universal positing power. I am no longer concerned with my body, nor with time, nor with the world, as I experience them in an anti-predicative knowledge, right before speech. Anti-predicative knowledge in the intercommunication that I have with them. I now refer to my body only as an idea, to the universe as an idea, to the idea of space and the idea of time. Thus, quote, objective thought in Kierkegaard's sense is formed, being that of common sense and science, which finally causes us to lose contact with perceptual experience, of which it is nevertheless the outcome and the natural sequel. So this is just the reiteration of that whole primacy of perception thing that, that was in Bergson that Heidegger took up. And I guess the whole life of consciousness is characterized by the tendency to posit objects, since it is consciousness, that is to say self-knowledge, only insofar as it takes hold of itself and draws itself together in an identifiable object. And yet the absolute positing of a single object is the death of consciousness, since it congeals the whole of existence as a crystal placed in a solution suddenly crystallizes it. So I think we could stop here and just read the last paragraph as a preface to the next section, if you wanted to stop for chronological reasons. Anything to say about that? Objective
Well,
thoughts. Yep.
it's a very long paragraph. So I think I think part of the account here is the fact that, right, in a way, modern philosophy is a product of thinking about this relationship between the body and the world in a scientific way. As soon as people like Newton and of course even before him are thinking of the world as mechanistic, right? And they're understanding perception in terms of the light bouncing off objects and going into eyes, whether it's particles or waves. Um, then we have a new way of thinking about perception that, according to Merleau Ponty, causes us to lose contact with perceptual experience it as we, as we experience it. Sorry, perceptual experience as we have it intuitively and
Right.
pre-scientifically.
Primordially.
Um, and of course, it's that way of thinking about the world that produces skepticism, right? How is it that we don't see the red? The red isn't out there. It's a product of interaction of a product of our interaction of the interaction between our eyes and the object. All of that stuff, all of the stuff we associate with modern philosophy, comes from this moment of thinking about this relationship between our body as a physical object and other physical objects in the world as something that can produce ekstase, something that can produce subjective experience. The mind body problem is implicated, of course. So, what's the overall point in the second part of this paragraph? The absolute positing of a single object is the death of consciousness, since it congeals the whole of its existence, as a crystal placed in a solution suddenly crystallizes it. This sounds a bit Rortian now, actually.
Well, but I wonder if it's an objection to Rortyism, because at least I was characterizing Rorty as believing in psychological nominalism, right? That it's really just the sentences that describe, and the sentences are about ideas. They are from the third person perspective. Even if it includes I in the sentence, it's really translatable to something that somebody could see while watching me. I only actually really have a sense of me, following Hegel, if I sort of get it from an outside perspective. But once you make that jump, and it's a natural dialectical step, but you are losing the initial just acquaintance with the object, that you're sort of going from the presumptive synthesis, the thing that I'm thinking, if I were to walk around this house, I would see another side of it, to it objectively exists in space and time, and would exist even if I were not here. That's a natural jump, but that was the thing. That's a jump to what Husserl called the natural standpoint, the scientific standpoint, the everyday standpoint. And clearly, though that's a very useful standpoint, but there's something that's in revealing that we conceal the initial primordial standpoint, and maybe there's going to be something wrong with that. Maybe at least we have to remember, hey, you're actually in a body. You actually have a perspective. You might be just giving a list of facts, but you don't have a view from nowhere. And we can just see what he makes of that.
Yeah, I just don't see the view from nowhere as associated with science per se. I think it's a natural step, and I thought that was part of the account prior to this, that we took that step. I'm surprised to find out that is in a way goes beyond the phenomenological account. So I mean, the absolute positing of a single object, I think, is, as a matter of naive realism, that's just what we do. We don't, of course, we posit mind independent objects, and we don't think about it. We don't need to think about the body and science and all that stuff to do that. But so that's why I'm a little bit confused. But
All right, we'll
Sure.
we'll review this last page and get to the last paragraph of the sum up of the first of the introduction here, and get into section 1 of the overall chapter of part 1 next time.
All
Thanks,
right.
everybody.
Thank you.